He was a coordinator who comes from the San Francisco system, which values a lot of heavy personnel usage, values a lot of sort of designed runs, zone running schemes with their running backs, uses a lot of play action and pre-snap motion. And like very little of these things were evident no matter what quarterback he had.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Adam Chernoff of Right Angle Sports on the show. Adam is a professional handicapper, and he is a content machine, and you'll see what I mean by the end of the episode. Among other topics, Adam talks about process, both his and that of Right Angle Sports, and working as part of the team. He talks about what he gets out of watching preseason NFL games, a change from previous seasons. And he also talks about an NFL Week 1 bet that he likes. This podcast is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Every week, I send out 5 Nugget Saturday, my curated list of sports betting tips, analytics, and humor. If you're looking for action any given weekend, this is the newsletter for you. To sign up for my free sports betting email newsletter, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of Football Analytics Show is Adam Chernoff of Right Angle Sports. He is an NFL expert, and I'm so excited to talk to him. Adam, welcome to the show.
Ed Fang, we're back for another season. I'm excited. We're just a couple days away from football. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are, T-minus 3 days until Detroit travels to Kansas City for the opening of the NFL season. And before we get to that, Adam, just maybe give us an overview for how you think of the NFL from a betting perspective.
Well, that's a big, wide, sprawling question. What specifically do we want to go? Where do we want to start with this one?
Well, let's say, week 1 is a little bit different because the spreads have been up forever. But let's say week 1 is over and you are looking at the market for week 2. Like, what does your week look like? And obviously it blends in with your work at Right Angle Sports, and I was going to make that a separate question, but if you want to talk about that now as well, but let's all the games are over. It's Sunday night, Monday morning. What does Adam Chernoff do?
So I see this question asked pretty often on Twitter. I hear it a lot on podcasts. So please jump in as we go here. I want to try and make this valuable for some folks listening. Maybe they can take something away rather than giving kind of a generic answer. And so, of course, the big difference for me this year is sort of being encouraged to look at the preseason as well as the early season different than I ever have. And a lot of that comes from just learning and seeing what the other guys on the team do. Obviously, the team is made of some of the best professional bettors in the entire country, and so getting to learn from them has changed my opinion. So for the first time ever going into week 1, rather than watching and trying to sort of learn what to think about the teams, for each of the 32 teams, I have a pretty strong preseason opinion. And so I'm looking more for things that I want to see to confirm or deny what those opinions are. So that's really the focus on week 1. Once we get past this Sunday, we're going to get the openers Sunday. I'm in Pacific time zone now, so right around 4:30 p.m. That's going to be after watching a full day of games. And from there, it's trying to see which opinions are confirmed, which opinions are changed, how I'm switching on teams, and then immediately coming up with initial leans on the games, which side looks better, which side of the total looks better, over, under, and coming up with that Sunday night. Monday morning is when a lot of the betting is going to happen. A lot of the releases are going to be going out. Tuesdays, sort of following up with confirmations. You have the Monday night game still ahead, so you have a couple games that are yet to come on the board. Tuesday morning, a lot of focus on totals, a lot of focus on those new lines. And then it's really Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, looking at injuries, reading news, reacting to things that come out, and trying to see how that's going to impact anything on the week. And then, Ed, we got to, I think, get into props if you want to make that kind of a separate sort of segue within this.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get to props in a sec. But before we do that, you're with Raz now. You started there about October of 2022. And so maybe just let me understand, like, you said you had a strong opinion of 32 NFL teams right now. So would you say that would be like stronger than your opinion of those 32 teams before the start of the 2022 season? Has that been a big change looking at what the Raz guys do?
Yeah, I just didn't really value what was going on within the preseason. And so I would start really doing my work late July. And then in August, I would get into team previews. And my goal with a lot of the team previews was I want to have sort of a take on every team and then a sort of comment on every single player and transaction, departure, new guy coming in, whatever it might be. And so I was just kind of looking at it as, here's the Kansas City Chiefs. Here are the new players. Here's why they're really good. Here's why they're really bad. And I would just kind of go through it like that. And then I would watch them week one. And I would kind of form an opinion on how good I thought they might be, how bad I thought they might be. But now going into this year specifically, I'm really, really focused and thinking about what is going to be different and how teams could play in a different way that's maybe a little bit unexpected. And so I have sort of notes and thinking around that started in like late June. We started doing work, which is way earlier than I ever have. And I also feel like the opinions that I have on all 32 of these teams for the first time ever have really been shaped in terms of what I saw during the preseason. And so I had teams where in July, when I did my first thoughts, I thought about them one way, and coming out of preseason, because the focus was so different for me this year working with the guys, that I've already switched my opinion on what I think about these teams, as well as confirmed what I think on a lot of these teams too. And so this year it's just started way earlier and it's a much different focus. And that's really changed how I think about the NFL and betting quite a bit.
That's very cool, Adam. One of the things that I've been surprised at from an analytics perspective is some work by Kostya Medvedovsky. He's mostly known for Darko, which is an NBA projection system, but he did like a Twitter thread on the importance of the NFL preseason. And it was one of these things where he said, okay, well, if we're going to project the season, obviously the most important thing is win totals, or that's going to be a strong way. Market win totals is going to be a strong way for how do we project teams. But then he asked, well, how much of the NFL preseason should we add to that to get a better projection? And I think a lot of people would say 0, right? That's actually not what he found. I think he found 15, 16% blend between preseason results and then market win totals. And I only bring that up to say that it kind of supports what you're saying. We can learn stuff from these teams in the preseason. I kind of question, I feel like maybe, the bulk of his work was, he's looking over 15 years of data, and the data that we could get from preseason results might have been a little bit more just because starting quarterbacks probably played a little bit more 3-4 years ago. And that isn't necessarily the case now, but there's certainly work to support watching those preseason games like you have. And maybe if you could comment on that, and then maybe if that's kind of how you feel and whether it potentially is less important just because we don't see the starting quarterbacks.
Let me give you a couple examples. I think it'll paint the picture. So perfect. In years past with a team like the Houston Texans, if I think back just to myself, even last year, before I was with the guys at RAS, my opinion on the Houston Texans would have been Bobby Slowick is coming in from San Francisco. Slowick comes from the Shanahan system. He's very, very highly renowned within the analytics space around football. This is going to be a very good offensive coordinator hire for Houston, and it's going to be much better than what Pep Hamilton did. And so my take would be that stock arrow up on the Houston Texans offense. This year, with sort of the switched focus and emphasis, that was my opinion on the team in mid-July, and I felt pretty strongly about it. After watching 3 games of Houston Texans preseason, there were so many issues with what Bobby Slowick was doing as a first-time offensive coordinator. and he was struggling to get timeouts at the right time. He was struggling with personnel. The offense looked completely disconnected from his scheme and what he was saying in the offseason. And so it was a complete switch where I went from, I think Houston can be a team that can score a lot of points and is being undervalued, to all of a sudden thinking that, well, Houston offense, I think it's really going to struggle. And it was actually the defense with DeMeco Ryans that really stood out to me, and how he handled all the depth that he has on the defensive side of the ball. And so we haven't even seen the Texans play a regular season game yet, but because of this shift in focus, I haven't thrown everything away, but I went from what would have been just this take that I formed and went with in years past that Houston's going to be great on offense, to saying, well, hold on a minute, I'm shifting this around. What we're seeing says kind of the opposite. And so there's a number of different teams that sort of fits within. The Raiders were another one that really stood out. And that's just, it's a very different way of thinking. And so it's not where I'm looking at a whole bunch of preseason data and stats and trying to predict something out. It's just putting extra work behind this opinion that I had earlier in the year, this year, than I ever had before.
Excellent. And I like how you gave the specific example about how the coordinator struggled with timeouts, because that's really a coaching thing, right? I mean, you can't pin that on rookie quarterback, maybe one of the weakest wide receiver cores in the league at Houston. Like, that's just something that maybe he'll figure out, or maybe he won't. And we'll get Nathaniel Hackett.
It goes past just like timeouts. Like, for example, he was a coordinator who comes from the San Francisco system, which values a lot of heavy personnel usage, values a lot of sort of designed runs, zone running schemes with their running backs, uses a lot of play action and pre-snap motion. And like, very little of these things were evident no matter what quarterback he had in any of the series that he was playing. And so you sort of hear this philosophy coming in, and you're really, from my side, looking to see what matches up and does it make sense. And so he's kind of saying one thing and then on field executing another. You don't know necessarily what's preventing that execution from being what he says he wants it to be, but it's something that stands out in a big way. And I'll give you another one with the Raiders. So Jimmy Garoppolo obviously comes from that same San Francisco system. When we were seeing him in the preseason and within camp, a lot of reports were about how the Raiders were using 3 wide receiver sets. And so it's a case where I look at Josh McDaniels. He had the opportunity to sort of tailor this offense around Jimmy Garoppolo, and where Jimmy had a lot of success, he looks to be doing the complete opposite. Now, optimism for the Raiders is pretty limited, but it's another example where when you're watching these preseason games, you can kind of see things here and there that just don't really line up with what coaches are saying or what they want to do. And it's kind of quite telling about what position it puts their players in. And so there's a lot of those notes as I go through the 32 teams that have kind of changed my opinion in a way.
It sounds like Josh McDaniels is trying to run his system and hoping Jimmy G fits into that system, as opposed to adapting his system to the strengths of his quarterback.
Exactly, right? Which very well is detrimental in many ways. And you see smart coaches make the most of what they have, and you see bad coaches and play callers try to force something, and one tends to work much better than the other. And so it's one of those things where I was way down on the Raiders early in the summer. There's been nothing this preseason, despite some scoreboards exciting people, that I think is far less meaningful than what you see on the field. I think there's a ton of signs that only confirm how down I am on the Raiders, but I think that's a team we'll dive into a little later.
Absolutely. You did a bunch of short previews for Right Angle Sports. I think they were both audio form and written form. It's been an important part of my process, Adam. I've been reading them. For the Raiders, you talked a lot about how dysfunctional it was, and it seemed like a team that wanted to move ahead with Jarrett Stidham, who was a New England guy from where McDaniels was, and then they did an about face, and then got Jimmy G only to have him go into surgery the next day or something like that, right?
The whole thing with the Raiders was as weird as we've seen from a team in a while. I don't know if it's getting the press it deserves.
Right, exactly. I mean, I hadn't kind of heard too much of that detail, but I bring that up because that we're going to talk a lot about the media stuff that you're doing in the future. But that was something that I appreciate, Adam, because I've been going to that, and like following every bit of off-season news is not something I do, and so I appreciate that you summarize it, and you have like, these 32 articles that just kind of give these types of little tidbits on NFL teams. And it's a great resource, and anyone can, I'll link to it in this podcast, and I encourage everyone to go check that out. But before we get too off track, I want to talk a little bit more about what the RAS process is, right? Like, you guys have, how big is your team? Like, when do you meet and coming up with your Monday and Tuesday plays? And then is that different heading into later in the week with injury news and props, I presume, will come out later in the week? How does the team work together for the RAS NFL?
There's just constant communication in a Slack channel that we have. For NFL specifically, I'd say there's probably 8 people focused full-time all around, contributing news, contributing information, contributing thoughts, contributing write-ups. It's just constant discussion. And when I say it doesn't turn off, it doesn't. It goes
right.
It goes all day. There's maybe a couple hours, 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. where it's a little bit quiet, but otherwise it's just constant messages and back and forth. There'll be more formal conference calls where everybody gets on and you go through game by game on the board, talk it out, come to decisions on what is going to be bet. And that happens a couple times per week for both NFL and college football. For college basketball, once November comes, that happens daily for about 4 months straight. But for NFL specifically, we've really kind of been going back and forth now for 3 months. I think everybody has pretty strong week 1 takes one way or another on every single game. So this week, for the most part, settled. We've released 4 games in total. Probably going to be a couple more to come. And then once we get later in the week, might see maybe 2 to 3 props get sent out. That'll probably be the expectation for the entire week. And then next week, there'll be a lot on Sunday night, Monday morning, Monday afternoon, and Tuesday morning to get all of the betting and releases sorted out. So it's really just, it's a boring answer, but it's constant communication that never stops.
And I presume before these conference meetings, everyone comes up with their own plays, right? And then talks them through in the conference call?
For the most part, everyone will have the opinions, and then you get to the end after everyone's talked it through, and there'll be top list, top 3, top 5, top 7, whatever it is, where everybody submits them at the exact same time. So you see who aligns on what and what the consensus is, and that kind of narrows down the card a little bit. But overall, what I've been in call-wise has been very free-flowing and just trying to get opinions on every single game and see what stands out. And it's really just when you have that many people talking games through, you get a really sort of well-rounded handicap of every single side or total. And there's a lot of very highly respected voices within there. And so I think everybody benefits from hearing that and going through that process every week to come up with those opinions. And so that sort of speaks to the success that the group has.
Excellent. Is there an analytic predictive model that you guys use as a team, or is that more up to the individual handicapper? Like a model that spits out, for example, my model has Kansas City by 8 against Detroit.
Yeah, there's nothing necessarily internally, I think maybe people listening kind of think there's something proprietary in terms of something that's kept highly secret and guarded in a room and a server and a spot somewhere. There's none of that, at least that I'm aware of. But everybody does do things a little bit differently from what I've experienced. Some people are much more focused on the numbers and beholden to what their numbers come up with. There are other people like myself that are much more focused on sort of the stylistic side of watching games and coming up with opinions on teams, looking at coaches, looking at play calling, things like that. And so it's a really well-rounded mix. But yeah, nothing sort of super secretive that I've come across just yet. There certainly might be, and maybe that's like a year 2 or 3 thing you get exposed to that. But really, it's just everyone has their own style and comes to the table with it.
Excellent. And Adam, you mentioned props, and that's going to be part of your NFL releases. This actually wasn't on my list of questions to ask you, but
here we are.
And exactly. I'm definitely more interested in NFL props because I feel like they're just easier to beat than an NFL side, and especially later in the week. So maybe take us through how you think about props and betting them, and then what people who subscribe to the Right Angle Sports Service, what they can expect with props.
Well, it's not easy. I'll say that first of all. I think props get painted with a brush that they're easy to beat and everybody can do it and everybody should be betting it. what I will agree with is that if you're a better listening to this and you're not doing it professionally, just because of the massive volume of props that are listed per game, I think you have obviously a much better chance if you're just the average everyday bettor. You're watching a game, you have a team you like, a team you follow, something you're really close to. You have a much better chance of using your opinion on what you're watching with the games that you like to find the prop that suits it, that you can have an edge on, than you are trying to beat sides and totals. I don't think that needs to be discussed. That's pretty self-explanatory. But the reason I say it's getting harder is because, like, for instance, with Kansas City and Detroit on Sunday morning, there were 3 different services that released props. And then yesterday night, there was another service that came through and released around the props as well. And the obvious sort of piece of info that was out there was around Gibbs, the running back for Detroit, and how he's going to be used in different ways. They're labeling it unexpected, but Ben Johnson, the play caller for Detroit, came out, and the one sort of thing that he let out from some of his press conferences were around Gibbs. So I would go back, Ed, probably 3 to 4 years ago, and there really were not a lot of people who were watching that press conference on a long weekend, Sunday night, before week 1, that would have come up with something and then use that to release out in services and move his receiving yard prop number from 20 and a half yards up to 33 and a half, right? That would have been something that happened later in the week. And so a lot of the really sort of out there stuff that you used to be able to use to make really good bets is just getting taken away very early. And so why I'm saying it's becoming more difficult is because you either have to have success really going away from what the sort of traditional process for many bettors looked like in terms of finding props to find something that's later in the week and a little bit more hidden, or you have to figure out where a lot of these places that are betting so early have pushed something too far and then go back against that or find a way to play off of it. And that's really changing up a lot of things. It's not as easy as just coming up with that projection and then betting it out right away. So I agree with you. Certainly easier than sides and totals, obviously. But when you're having to do it later in the week and you're sort of doing it for a wide audience, it's becoming a lot more difficult to do something that's widely available.
Yeah, for sure. How do you go about it?
Well, you sleep a lot less, Ed. I'll be honest. There's a lot of work, a lot of following. But for me, honestly, it's just the same stuff that I do every day. Before I joined Red Angle Sports, I was doing Telegram, I was doing stuff on Twitter, doing stuff through the podcast. And it's a boring answer. There's not much to it, but you're watching a lot of games. You're reading a lot of stuff that comes out. You're trying to read between the lines of beat reporter Twitter, trying to sort of sift through Google to find things. And once you find it, you're just trying to validate, is this likely to happen? Is this not? And then you're trying to find a bet that fits what you're finding. It's a boring sort of answer to that process question, but really that's all there is to it. And that's why my advice always is, when you're just that average guy that's watching at home, trying to find props to bet, just stick with what you know best. Because if you do that, you're going to find something rather than trying to go through all 32 teams. I think there's a really big advantage in that.
Absolutely. So the Adam Chernoff answer is you put in the work. Actually, I just wanted to mention, you obviously put in the work. I mean, how much do you end up sleeping during the NFL season?
No, I sleep well, but I truly enjoy watching the NFL outside of golf, which I love because I play it all the time and I'll watch it if it's on because I can relate to it. The NFL is the only sport that I'm watching. And I think by watching all these games and just investing so much time and energy into it, it's really taken away from enjoyment that I get from watching any other sport. And I really accept that trade-off because I like doing it so much. And so when it's Wednesday of week 6 and I'm out to dinner with the wife and it's 8:30 p.m. and I'm thinking in my mind about, well, how is this offense going to match up against this defense? And is there a prop that I can take advantage of? That's just kind of the trade-off that comes with it. And I accept that and I enjoy it. It's just constantly going through anything that comes up at any time trying to come up with something. And so again, it's a boring answer, but it's just you put in the time and work, and then you find the bets that you can win with.
Excellent. Adam, is there a week 1 NFL bet that you'd be willing to share?
Well, where do we want to go from that? Do we want to go sides? Do we want to go totals? Maybe a little bit too early for props. Talked about that Gibbs stuff. That's probably still pretty good, but where do we want to go, side or total?
I would like an NFL side to bet if it's the same to you.
How long do we have before this airs for people listening? Let's put it in that perspective.
Yeah, well, we are recording Monday. The likelihood is that this goes up tonight, so Monday, September 4th.
Is a teaser fair play for this? Can we do that?
Sure.
A 6-point teaser. So whether you're doing a traditional teaser, you're going with alternate lines. Let's go Washington with Miami. Washington leg 1, Miami leg 2. Do we want a quick breakdown of each of these?
Yes, please.
Okay. The Arizona Cardinals are a disaster. Maybe they sort things out as the season progresses, but it looks like they're starting Clayton Tune. He's going to be behind a backup at third string center. They lost their starting center for the season. They traded away Isaiah Simmons just a couple days ago, their best defensive player. Had a ton of tackles last year. This is a team going in the wrong direction in a hurry. I think Jonathan Gannon was a good defensive coordinator the last couple spots that he had, but he's very underqualified as a head coach. And all of this has to go on the road to face Washington, who I don't rate a whole lot higher, but in this given situation, with how bad it's been for Arizona and what Washington wants to do in terms of making a statement with the new ownership, if you watch preseason week 2, that energy around the team at home was completely different than anything that we have seen from the Commanders in several seasons. And so there's such an emphasis on this game for Washington. I don't think Sam Howell is going to be challenged in this game specifically to move the football. And I think whatever quarterback Arizona has playing catch up is going to be in a really tough time against that defensive line for Washington. So I think it's a very comfortable home win for the Commanders. Probably one of the few times that I will bet and look for a case to bet on the Commanders all season long. But I think it starts and looks really good for them. And then in the other matchup, for Miami specifically, I thought the biggest offseason move, player or coaching staff, was Vic Fangio coming in as the defensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. I think he is going to bring this defense to the Dolphins to a level that matches the offense, which is a sort of scary proposition for any other team in the AFC. But price-wise, this matchup, in all the major rankings that are out there, there's very little, if any, difference separating Miami and the Chargers. And there's no home field advantage here whatsoever for the Chargers. So for me, this number to get to 3 doesn't make a lot of sense. And you can tease Miami up. If you're giving me this offense and more than a touchdown with Fangio stepping in as the defensive coordinator and how tight he manages to keep games, I think that's a really, really good teaser like to add in. So we'll do Washington with Miami, 2-team teaser.
Awesome. So we were teased Washington to -1 because I'm seeing them at -7 right now against a train wreck of a team, and then Miami +9. Awesome. Love it, Adam.
And I'm going to catch flack because it's not the traditional teaser. I get it. Numbers are being priced a little bit differently here and there, but 2 legs I think are really, really good.
Excellent. Adam, I wanted to ask you about a couple teams that I'm trying to figure out personally. And the first one's Atlanta. What do we make about this team? Obviously a very easy schedule, but they made some interesting moves. Drafting Bijan Robinson, a running back, which is not what the nerds like me tell you to do when you're going into the NFL season. They're starting Desmond Ridder at quarterback, and their defense was a disaster last year. So what are you thinking about this Falcons team?
Another nerd, Arthur Smith, thought that it was a very good idea to take Bijan Robinson. And so a bit of a battle here is Smith is a guy from play caller that gets a lot of support from certain folks within the analytics community. And so I think that was a bit of a jarring situation. I know exactly what you're looking at there. But what excites me a lot about this Falcons team is, in a similar way to the Giants with Daboll and Kafka, the Falcons are going to be pushing this sort of shift within the NFL that's going to go towards positionless football on offense. when you look at the guys that they have, all of the skill guys are so interchangeable within this offense. And Arthur Smith is one of the few play callers and play designers that's smart enough to be able to pull this off. And so there's articles as recent as this morning coming out where guys on the team are saying that Kyle Pitts could be fourth in targets over the course of the season, which is a crazy thing to say, but it really sort of illustrates how between Pitts, Miller, Hollins, London, Robinson, some other depth guys behind them, Cordell Patterson mixed in there as well, the Falcons can kind of play anybody anywhere. And I think it's going to make them very difficult to game plan against on a weekly basis. There's really not a lot of challenges out in front of them in terms of the schedule. A lot of these NFC teams have a really easy schedule, but this is sort of front-loaded for the Falcons. So I think it's going to be a very fun offense to watch. I think we're going to see big improvement from the defense as well. They added some key pieces. I think that's going to look a lot better too. So I'm very optimistic on the Falcons over the course of the season. We have releases on their win total over. That was at 8.5. I really think that this is a team that can contend for 10 wins and the NFC South title.
And how much trust do you have in Desmond Ridder to lead the show on offense with this positionless football?
Not a lot. Our expectation was that if he can play into the 18 to 20 range within the league, that this is a team that can contend for 10 wins. We think that's enough of a performance to get this team over their posted win total. If things go completely awry, we get Heineke stepping in as a very capable backup. Wouldn't be the ideal scenario, but I don't think that you need a lot from the quarterback position. And it's another crazy thing to say, but like if you get a quarterback that's in that 18 to 20 range, whether it's Ridder or Heineke, I think this Falcons team will be just fine. I think there's just a ton of pieces here they can get a lot out of with their play calling.
Excellent. Do you know what like total football is in soccer?
I do not. Tell me about it.
Have you do you watch Ted Lasso?
I do not. Tell me about it.
So
you're getting
total
me in
football
uncharted waters here.
Total football was this idea that came out of Holland back in the 70s, and the idea was like everyone plays every position. So you have 10 field players out there, and the defenders go up and attack, and the attackers come back and defend. It was total football, and it was like essentially positionless football. I should say soccer. We're on American football podcast.
Works both ways.
So it was this idea, and what's interesting to me is that in soccer, people don't really play total soccer, total football. Central defenders defend, and the wing backs do attack a little bit, but you never have like your center forward coming back and defending unless it's not a set piece. But in basketball, we're really kind of seeing a revolution towards total basketball. We have guys like Nikola Jokic that is quote unquote a center, but he's really playing point guard and bringing the ball up. As basketball players get more skilled, we're really in the era of total basketball. It doesn't matter how tall you are; you're kind of expected to do everything. And so, what you were just talking about with Atlanta in this positionless football is kind of the next step in total football, where I think you're basically saying Bijan is going to be in there. He might have top 3 targets because he is a good pass catcher. And in that sense, who cares that he was labeled as a running back coming out of college and was drafted so high? He's an asset because of his receiving, just kind of like McCaffrey is, even when he was coming out of college as well. So they are going into an era of positionless football. I mean, I guess, when you're giving wide receivers like jet sweeps and carries that way, you're just getting your athletes into space, right? And so I guess Atlanta's kind of at the forefront of this positionless football, this total American football, maybe we should call it.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen glimpses of it with other teams. You saw Debo used in very different ways. We've seen Patterson with Atlanta before, like in different systems used in very different ways. You think about how guys like Cooper Kupp were sort of moved around. Jefferson was motioned into the backfield a number of times last year for Minnesota. So there's been sort of glimpses of it, but we really haven't seen a coaching staff like fully embrace it and really push it for several plays that weren't sort of like a one-off here and there. And so I think Atlanta is really shaping up where they can do that. And like Ed, we just talked about Gibbs in Detroit. You read that Ben Johnson article and what he was talking about. They're talking about using him as a running back, not only as a slot wide receiver, but also getting him out wide, using him in the running and the passing game. Like there's a lot of different ways you can do it. And you think about what sort of issues that causes for a defense. It really forces them to defend in ways that they haven't before. And I really think that this is something a lot of teams are going to push for. We've seen a couple changes in the last 10 years from going from that. A lot of teams, like you think about Kansas City, it was a lot of spread sets, 3 wide receivers. Defenses adjusted, started playing that 2 deep look against them. So they go to 2 and 3 tight end sets last year, the highest rates in the league. That was their way to adjust and sort of counter that. And now defenses are beginning to counter that as well. And so it's just this constant game of cat and mouse and catch up that teams have to adjust for. But what we're starting to see from Atlanta, what we're starting to see from New York, the Giants specifically, what we're starting to see a little bit and hear about from Detroit, all of these guys are just highly rated top offensive minds. To me, I'm seeing all of them starting to sort of speak the same language and go the same direction. I think that's a pretty good indicator of where this league is going to go.
And then I would think that to counter that, I mean, you're just going to be putting more defensive backs on the field, right?
I mean, we're seeing those rates of extra defensive backs used at a much higher percentage than we ever have before. So absolutely, you just need athletes to defend for sure.
And so the trend, I mean, we're going to continue to see the trend of more defensive backs out there, which obviously, pushes team building as well, and what you're going to get in the draft, what you're going to do in free agency. I was actually just thinking about, probably when this current crop of players was in youth football, it seemed like a good idea to be a running back, right? You get the ball, you score touchdowns, yada, yada, yada. But that advice is like idiocy right now. I mean, if you're going to take an athlete that can be a running back, isn't the good advice to teach that kid how to cover? Isn't that the best for his long-term projections to play at the highest level?
For putting running backs into defensive back scenarios?
No, but just if you can play both sides. I mean, if you're an elite athlete and you project, I mean, I think a lot of kids get pushed to be running back because they want to be. They want the ball. They want to score touchdowns. But the way that football is going, you should really learn how to cover. And who wants to cover, I guess.
Whew, okay, we're getting into youth football. This can go a lot of. I have strong takes on Canadian youth football, but in terms of the youth level in the U.S., I'm not too sure on that specifically. What I would say in regards to your defense comment, like you're seeing a guy like Jamal Adams for Seattle. He's traditionally a safety, but this year there's a push to get him playing linebacker. There was Isaiah Simmons left Arizona. We mentioned earlier he's traditionally a linebacker, but now there's push to get him playing safety and defensive back. And so on the defensive side, you're starting to see a lot of these really sort of freak athletes be able to play multiple positions and be moved around. And that's where you get the counterpoint to what these offenses are doing and where the league is trending in that perspective. So I don't know if I have an opinion on running backs playing defensive back. That would be a lot of fun, but
or just receiver. I mean,
receiver 100%. I completely agree because it's so hard. So if you start a running back and you motion him out wide, and all of a sudden he gets the traditional linebacker in coverage, that's a mismatch that all 32 teams in the league can take advantage of. But a lot of the 32 teams in the league don't have a running back that you can split out wide and generate space and coverage. And so that's becoming like a huge asset for teams to find guys that can do both, like we're talking about with Detroit and Gibbs, or Atlanta with Patterson, or even Bijan. So that's 100% agree.
Excellent. Adam, you already mentioned Arizona and how bad they're going to be. And it actually reminded me, the beginning of the 2021 season, this team got off to a really good start and they made the playoffs. They stunk in that game against San Francisco, but the Rams, I think it was.
But 2021 going back. Oh boy. Yeah. I think it was the Rams. I think it was the Rams, and Murray was a disaster.
But when you were heading into the 2022 season, you had an Arizona team that had answers at the quarterback position and was, I don't remember where we rated them a year ago, but all of a sudden a year later, from what I read, it's definitively the worst roster. Kyler Murray is hurt, and it's one of the worst teams. So, kind of how did we get here? And I mean, how bad is it going to get?
So we got here with a GM head coaching combination that really bought into a system where Cliff just wasn't breaking through, and it had an impact early. There was sort of a quick adoption by the league, and then it became very predictable, and you just saw sort of the skill position for the Cardinals get depleted year after year after year. As I mean, last season, week 1, leading receiver was Greg Dortch. You had Marquise Brown mixed in there, little Eno Benjamin from James Conner. I think he's still healthy, would start the season, but that was a team that tried to make AJ Green work. Like, they were so desperate for skill guys, they just didn't have it. And so when you were as predictable as they were from a formation perspective, it made the team very vulnerable on offense, and it just put them in a spot where they couldn't control games. And so that was just, it got worse year after year after year, and went on a year too long, and now they're paying the price for it. And so it's going to be a long rebuild for Arizona. Let's see what happens with Murray. His price is only going up. He's obviously off the deal now, and so that's massive for a cap hit and what they have to deal with. Now, they certainly have a lot of pieces in the draft that they can sort of stockpile and control next year, especially if they move on from him. They can get a lot of really good young pieces. But is Jonathan Gannon going to be the head coach and guy you want to build around? It's just, as a defensive head coach, it's not really the direction you want for a rebuild in 2023 onward. And so I don't know what happens with this team going forward, but it's going to be ugly for Arizona all year.
Would you move on from Kyler Murray, or would you need to see what happens when he gets back from injury?
A lot. I'm not a big college guy, but there's a lot of QB talent coming up. So it's hard to sort of justify hanging on to Murray at his price when you're going into a year where you're very likely going to be in line for the number 1 pick. You have a ton of draft assets behind it to build around. You can get a really fresh start. So there's a cap scenario that is going to have to be avoided by Arizona, and there's details of that are sort of lingering. But I think you kind of have to at this point. He was drafted to fit within that system. It didn't work. He's got the injuries now. I don't know what he looks like as a QB going forward.
All right. Adam, how about a surprise prediction for the 2023 NFL season?
Is Cowboys winning the Super Bowl counts as a surprise because they haven't done it in forever?
I mean, it wouldn't to me, but yeah, please tell me more.
I think that's a pretty good one. Not a lot of other like sort of shock or surprises that I can really throw out, but the wide receiver depth is as good as it's been for the Cowboys in as long as Dak has been there, for sure. You can probably go back further than that. If Turpin and Tolbert can emerge as wide receiver 4 and 5 and really make an impact, that's a dangerous group of skill position guys. The governor on the team that would hold them back every year, especially recently, was Zeke. He's now out of there. So even if you get Jerry Jones trying to sort of push his mandate of running the football, well, it's going to be Tony Pollard doing it, which is what everybody has wanted and been screaming for the last 2 years, who has a pulse around the team. So you can't really screw that up. And I think Dak's going to look a lot better. Those turnovers are going to go away. Really stock arrow up and everywhere on the Cowboys offense. And then defensively, they're able to stay in sort of their highly aggressive pass rush mindset under Dan Quinn, who's had nothing but success turning this defense around, and you get good production from Stephon Gilmore as cornerback number 2 on the other side of Diggs. This is going to be one of the best defensive units all the way around, too. That the addition of Gilmore and how that alleviates the stress on the defensive backfield and just allows the pass rush to completely open up, I think is just incredibly important. And so I like everything about this Cowboys team on both sides.
I am also very high on Dallas as well. I think they're going to be really good. I think I've already bet them to win the division. Does your optimism about Dallas to get far, to make the Super Bowl, does that express any pessimism about Philadelphia, who went to the Super Bowl last year?
Not directly. I think obviously both teams are going to make the playoffs and it's sorted out. But last year, really, the separation that I had just rating wise between Dallas and Philadelphia was not significant. I think both of these teams going into the year on paper match up pretty evenly overall. And so with how light the rest of the NFC is, I think very confidently both of these teams obviously going to get to the playoffs, and then it's going to be that one game in January that settles it. But in that situation, I just don't anticipate much separating both of these teams. I just think the upside with Dallas being the one that's underpriced coming in relative to Philadelphia presents a lot more than paying the big price for the Eagles.
That sounds good. Adam, you do a ton of work over at Right Angle Sports on the content side of things. I want to just ask you about some of them. So first, there's a Raz app, which I really like. I downloaded it, and what you can get is, a lot of your insights from the NFL preseason. Things like, Russell Wilson looks good, and he's lost a little bit of weight, so maybe we have a little bit more confidence that Denver can bounce back from a miserable season. Why'd you guys decide to do that, and what else can we get in there, and tell us more about the Raz app?
So I record the Simple Handicap podcast every morning, but Saturday all season long. This is about a 10-minute podcast, keeps everybody up to date with what's going on in the NFL market. The problem with the podcast is it airs at 5 a.m. every single day throughout the season except Saturday morning. And once it airs, it has probably a 3 to 5 hour shelf life before things tend to move, just because it talks about news that impacts markets or opinions get accounted for, stuff like that. But once the podcast is recorded, there's nothing until the next morning. And so there's a very big audience around the podcast that I thought was being a little bit underserved, because once I go off the air at about 5:05 in the morning, there's a full day of football to transpire. And so the app was really something that was created to where it can be an extension of that throughout the day. Whereas I see things happening throughout the league, I can comment on them. It's short form text notifications that will give you a little bit of blurb about a whole bunch of different things. But also, the second part of this is I want to begin connecting the audience with the expertise that exists at Right Angle Sports. And so what you're going to get from the app, which is a free download and free to use, is if you're watching Thursday Night Football and it's a crazy game and the game ends and it's maybe a 35-32 final and you're going, this was an incredible game, but what's the takeaway? What do I get from this? What am I going to think about both of these teams going forward? There'll be a recap that looks at the box score, that looks at things that we saw that maybe you didn't. If there's an injury during the week, a key quarterback goes down, how do you know what that's worth? How do you know how to think about the impact on the team? You open the app, there'll be a comment about that injury, how much we think it's worth, what we think about it. You're going to get some insight from that as well. You're going through a busy Sunday. Maybe you have a family, you're out with the kids, whatever, you miss a little bit of games. There'll be updates with every game that are going on for things that we saw, we think are important, that you should think are important as well. And so there's just a lot of different commentary and insights that we'll be sharing throughout the course of the season that I think will help a lot of bettors, will make you think about betting on football a little bit differently, whether that's sides, totals, props, and just give that extension of the podcast that I've wanted to do for a really long time. People love the pod in the morning, but again, there's so much that happens during the day where if you're not waiting for that next morning, you might be missing something that you can use as well. So I hope that it works. It's got a good response so far, except from Android users, but we'll have something for them as well soon.
Tech problems. Adam,
we just need to live in a world, Ed, where everybody has one phone that's one type of phone. Maybe it's different sizes. Apple and Google need to figure out some sort of merger. I think people who own Androids are probably very fine people. This is not a jab at anyone who has one, but it's the operating system of Android is just such a pain in the ass, not only to use, but also develop products for. It's just everything about it is an absolute miserable and horrible experience. Whereas you have an iPhone, you have Apple, they make everything so developer friendly. It's easy to test. It's easy to develop. It's easy to launch. It is superior and better in every single way. And it's not a personal stance here. I know it sounds like it, but just we need to get to a spot where everybody has one phone and it makes the most sense. This one or the other is just horrible.
Yeah. Well, the U.S. government would kill that merger for antitrust stuff. So.
Well, we said pre-show we're not going to get into politics.
That's right. Dang it.
We
forgot about that.
Something's got to happen because this is just the Android OS is just awful in every way.
And I presume you're hiring developers to do that end of things. I mean, you're not writing any code for an Android app.
Well, yeah. So we have a full-time developer who's helping us with the app. I have experience in product management in my past, and what happens is you, for example, like 75% of our users use an iPhone. So it's a 75-25% split. So we started by doing the iOS app. And it was incredibly basic intentionally so we could get feedback on what to improve and how to make it better. And so we got it out very quick, started putting content in it, worked fantastic, incredibly basic, incredibly simple to use. There was nothing to it. It was just text. And then you could have filters and decide if you basically say, I want more of this, I want less of this, and you get more of the stuff that you want. That's the extent of the app. And then, of course, we publish it. Everyone who has an iPhone is happy. And then the Android people are left out. They say, I want it, I want it, I want it. So anytime there's discussion of the app anywhere, it's flooded with people saying, I have an Android, I want the app, which is completely understandable. But then you have to branch out within the development. So you have the iOS branch that's for Apple, and then you have the Android branch, which is for Android. But then that duplicates all of the work you need to do for testing. It duplicates all the work you need to do for development. And it also splits the design because something can't look one way on Apple and then look the same way on Android because all the functionality, the buttons, the sounds, how it launches, that's all different too. I'm going on a tangent here, but it just doubles the work, but the customer split doesn't justify doubling the work. And then you get a worse product on both sides trying to satisfy the entire user base. And so it just honestly becomes a massive pain in the ass, but it's unfortunately hurting development on both sides now that we've done the split. So if it was just one, it would be a lot more manageable, but now it's managing two branches and it's trouble. That was a weird random tangent, but here we are.
Here we are. You already mentioned the Simple Handicap. This is your daily podcast. It is back as of this morning, I believe. And how did that first start?
I wanted to do something for Amazon Alexa right when it first came out because I was like, this is going to be. I think it was 2016. I was like, this is going to be the future. Everyone's going to have one of these. They're going to control our lives. I want to be the top sports betting option for that. And so I tried to do a podcast that was 2 minutes. I couldn't get it. I couldn't get it short enough. I couldn't say what I wanted to say in that 2 minutes. And so about like 10 people downloaded the Alexa app 8 years ago, whatever it was. And then I was like, screw this. So I left it. And then about a year later, I started doing just short form audio for Apple and Spotify. And my theory was everybody wakes up sort of with a clear mind for the most part, and they have a very specific routine that they follow. So I want to make something that becomes a part of everybody's morning routine, takes up 8 to 10 minutes, and just catches you up so then you can know how to think about NFL betting for the rest of the day, know what to look for, know what's important, as well as know what happened when maybe you were doing something with your life the day prior. And so it's just become this 10-minute episode per day update / podcast / thoughts jammed into one with no fluff. And it's just kind of taken on a life of its own in a way. The numbers are extremely high every day. There's a community around the show, and it's legitimately become part of people's routine. I hear people say, I listen to it every morning in the shower. I listen to it every morning walking the dog. I can't go to work and commute without it. It's just kind of become this part of everybody's morning. And so it was intended to be something completely different than what it's turned into. But sort of theme of the podcast is here we are.
And you just get up every morning early and record it? Is that your process?
It depends on the day and situation. Sometimes I'll do it if it's a later day. I'll sort of record the podcast at like 12 a.m., 11:30 p.m., and it goes live at 5 a.m. So there's in that 5-hour window, I've yet to experience something regarding NFL news that has impacted the market. There's just not a lot going on at 1 and 2 in the morning. But then other days, if I'm up and stuff is going on, then I'll record that right before the time goes live. So it's a split between the two. It just really depends.
And when we were talking before the show, you also mentioned that Right Angle Sports is going to do 400 short videos. Tell us more about that.
400. That's the goal is 400.
Okay.
I'm taking a big bet, and I'm a big believer in short form video content. Again, it's not my sort of thesis around this is twofold. It's one, from a user and consumer perspective, it's much easier to take something from a 30-second video that you can use yourself that sticks with you than trying to listen to a 90-minute podcast and dedicate the time to do that, to take one thing away. And I think that it's just where information delivery is going. So that's one, from the consumer side. And then two, my thought is that I experience it as well. When I do a 10-minute podcast, I find it really hard to talk myself for 10 minutes and to be engaging and entertaining. I've never had guests on or anything like that to sort of match up and create that conversation. I'm trying to get really good at delivering that 10-minute message, and what's most important, in 30 seconds or less. I find it both fun but also challenging to do it, and I think that it presents really, really well. And so it's a big bet that we're making, investing the time and resources to doing. The goal is 400 during the NFL season, and those will be up on social, free to consume. I think they'll be really helpful, and people will get a lot from it. We've done a lot for preseason that people have really enjoyed. Numbers have been really, really good. So hopefully that'll continue as we have actual regular season games coming up.
I presume you're doing some of those videos, but not all of them. Who else on the team is doing the videos?
No, it's me doing them. I would love if other guys on the team would jump out and do them, but the goal is to do 400 myself.
400 yourself. So you're going to average 3 a day from now until the rest of the season.
That's right. It might actually be a touch higher than that, but that's the goal. For some of them, I do have someone else who's not from the team that I'll kind of leave as a cliffhanger, who's contributing about 15 to 25 seconds per video. But other than that, it's just me doing it. So yeah, it'll be about 3 a day. We're going to try to do 400 this season, and it'll be constantly going out.
Do you at least have a tech guy that like helps you edit the podcast and these videos, pushes them up?
Yeah, well, we hired a full-time video editor, and she's been fantastic helping out with that. So that takes the editing burden of the video side. The podcast comes out easy enough that I clean up any little audio marks here and there. But the podcast for me is just press record, go for 10 minutes, publish it. It's really easy. But the video help has been substantial. I think it shows in the quality. It's really easy to make a bad quality video. I think it's really hard to make a good quality 30 or 60 second video. And I think it really matters a lot in a world full of really bad short form videos, where if there's a little bit of that production quality, it stands out. So we're going to have her helping out, and these will all be really well edited videos for the 400 that we're planning on doing.
Is someone helping you with the text updates to the app?
No, that's me writing it as well. I'm hoping like Ed from our side contributed a piece so far, but it would be great to have a few more. But otherwise, it's just this is life. It's NFL season. You're at the desk all day, and you're doing work, and so all the text stuff comes from me as well.
That's amazing, Adam Chernoff. I respect that amount of work. Adam, would love to would love to end the show with some potentially non-sports questions. You will be held in captivity for a year without the internet, but you can bring one item to help you pass the time. What are you going to bring?
Well, okay, so the answer is a sand wedge, but can I bring a ball as well? Or do I just have to make sort of dead air swings in the middle of nowhere?
No, you can bring a ball.
Yeah. So how big is the space that I am held in captivity of? What are the dimensions?
Let's just say, I don't know, as big as you need. I'm throwing
the question back at you.
Yeah, no, I like it. How about you? But for you, Adam, we'll give you like a basement with some size, right? So like, the dimensions. Well, tell us a little bit more. Obviously, this has to do with your love of golf, and you're gonna be down in that basement where you have a lot of space and hit some golf balls.
Well, yeah. I mean, if I have nothing to do and there's no other worries whatsoever, and this is like a forced activity, I can't think of anything better to come out of it than with a very, very good short game that you're very confident in. And so if a guy brings a wedge and you're hitting pitch shots for 10 hours a day over and over and over again, life is better when you have a good short game and there's confidence in it. It's not just the life you feel around golf, but you're just a better person in every single thing that you do in all aspects. And so you come out with a really good short game from that, you're feeling pretty good. So sand wedge and a ball, that's an easy answer.
That's great, but why not a putter?
Well, how many straight putts can you hit over and over again to know that you're seeing any improvement? And if you're a better pitcher and you have a better short game, or you have a better short game all the way around, you're going to end up with shorter putts that are easier to hole out to begin with. And so if you just practice putting over and over again, you might leave with a little bit of confidence, but you don't solve the problem of, if you don't have a good short game, you're going to be left with really long putts where your make rate is going to be super low to begin with. So you got to get the ball closer to the hole to begin with, and then the putting will take care of itself.
And if we held you in captivity out in a big open field, would you bring a driver?
No, I still work the wedges. Honestly, I did a podcast with Jeff Ma and Rufus week 18 last year. And there was a question along these lines of like, what's going to be the thing that you like work on? And they tried to skew it towards a betting answer. I was like, I'm not biting into that. And my answer was that I'm going to work on my short game all summer. And It threw them off guard because I was like, I can't continue living life without having a better short game because it was just killing me. And I was in the middle of a really bad stretch. And the impact trickled down throughout the rest of my life. And so it's been right after that podcast, which was in early January, we ended up in California at the end of February. And there was a little short golf course outside of Huntington Beach that I would go to at like 7:30 in the morning. And I was just hitting wedge after wedge after wedge. And it's got to the point now where it's become by far the biggest area of confidence and strength within my golf game from 100 yards and in. And it's taken such a burden off the golf game, but also just a massive burden off of my shoulder and mind in every other aspect of life that's now freeing me up to be able to do 400 short videos in the next 3 months. So I'm all in. I'm all in on short game improvement. I have very little interest of practicing any other area, and it's made fantastic. Me a better person because of it.
I feel like Ed Golden should pay for your wedge, or should buy you a new wedge because now you have time to do 400 short form videos.
It's just the freedom and peace of mind that you have it.
Yeah,
you don't go to bed thinking about this 60-yard pitch shot that you bladed across the green into the back bunker. You're just a better person because of it.
I just love the specificity of it. You know, how often do you get out and play golf?
Just after the move, time will tell. But now it's opened up an option to do year-round play because we don't get much snow out here in the Pacific Northwest where I am now. So hopefully it'll be at least practicing a couple times a week when things slow down in the evenings. But I would still love to if I get a round a week in with a couple hour-long practice sessions after things slow down later in the day throughout November, December, January, I'll be a very happy person.
Awesome. Adam, if you could live the life of any historical figure, who would you be?
You got me with this one last time I did the podcast, and so I'm sticking with the same answer.
Dang it.
I'm sticking with the same answer of Mo Norman. I can't change it. The question was last time, I think it was around like having dinner or like being around someone. And so that was a really easy one. He didn't live the most pleasant life, I would say. So it's kind of probably not a choice that anyone would ever consider for this question. But again, he was viewed as the greatest ball striker of all time in golf. And it's not just like hearsay from people, but like Tiger Woods speaks of sort of this folklore around him. And some of the videos that he had online that were very limited were unlike anything else. And so some of the stories around what he was able to do with a golf club and a golf ball were incredible. And so to be able to live that life, just to feel what that control would be like, I think would be something, even if it wasn't sort of the greatest ending for him.
Wow. I love it. So what would you do if you had to pick between NFL and playing golf? Like if one of the two had to get taken away from you, which one would you pick?
Whoa. Well, I've come to the conclusion that I could never make a living from playing golf. That was decided long, long, long ago. So that would be a blow. What I would say is if I had the option to where teaching golf to other players aspiring to become better would give me the same lifestyle and freedom that being around the NFL and betting would give me, I may lean towards golf in that aspect. I think that would be really interesting just because I think that there's a lot of parallels between betting as well as golf. And there's a ton of parallels between how people talk about betting and how people talk about golf. And I think that would be one of the few places where sort of the skills and what I've learned experience-wise could actually translate over and have an impact, and would be for something I really, really enjoy. The all-time dream would be to buy a short 9-hole course somewhere and own it and just make it one of the best like quality and standard of courses within the area that people could come out to play and participate at a very low price without much barrier of entry and keep it very casual. But that is, again, sort of as I continue to progress, that gets further and further away because the inventory goes down and the price is only going up. So that's kind of something to chase. But I would probably lean towards golf if it could be equal or maybe just slightly less affording than what NFL gives me.
Adam Chernoff, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter, X, and other places on the internet.
raspicks.com for everything around the service, the Simple Handicap podcast, Apple and Spotify, and then the RAS app, which is in Apple stores right now, in the Apple App Store. Android folks will have something for you soon, but it's not there just yet.
You have a personal Twitter account as well, right? That you post a lot of stuff to.
I guess that's up too. Too much to promote. At Adam Chernoff on Twitter is the address to go there.
Adam, thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, Ed.
My name is Ed Fang, and I'm proud to be the host of the Football Analytics Show podcast. I really hope you enjoyed that conversation with Adam Chernoff as much as I did. He has so much information. Please try to harness all that information on all the channels that he talked about in this podcast episode. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter. This includes 5 Nugget Saturday, my curated list of sports betting tips and analytics. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. My name is Ed Fang. There's going to be a couple of football preview series episodes that will be online this week. And then next week, we'll get back to more interviews. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.